And I went to the Reimagine conference in Hamilton last October, and that is where I met Carla and Colleen and Peter, and they adopted me. They just took me in, and I'm just very grateful. I also met Adam and Heather there and others, and just really felt the love. Yeah, so I'm 63 years young, and I have an MDiv degree from the Anderson School of Theology at Anderson University in Indiana. I'm ordained with the Church of God, and there are probably a couple of hundred denominations that go by that particular name. It's a fairly small denomination, probably just over 500,000 constituents, and it's represented in about 100 countries. And just to kind of position it in the church landscape, some of you old timers might recognize names like Doug and Laura Lee Oldham, or Bill and Gloria Gaither, Sandy Patty. I'm not seeing any rousing applause or anything. Stephen Curtis Chapman was one of the musicians that kind of came out of that circle, but you've all heard of Charles Schulz, who's the Peanuts cartoon creator. They would be affiliated with the Church of God, just to kind of position it. I also have a degree in dental hygiene, and I did that work part-time until August of last year alongside the church work. Yeah, so my partner and I, Cindy, started what we called Mississauga Community Church, now called Joshua Creek Church, in 1987. And for the entire duration of the life of that congregation, which is still in existence, we met in 3 different schools, and also some community centers and homes and things like that. So we have never owned a facility. And as I think about these 30 plus years, in the way that we positioned ourselves in schools, we were really a drive-in church all the time. Like, we never committed ourselves to the neighborhood that any of those church, schools were at. And around the year 2000, we were about 200 people, and that was kind of our peak in terms of constituents or church membership. And it was at that time that we bought 50 acres of land in Oakville. And we felt like that was kind of our ticket and the on-ramp to becoming a mega church. And presently, we are a congregation of 15 people, 15. And so there's obviously a story there. We experienced quite a congregational train wreck or implosion, and it actually happened in September of 2001. So we had our own experience of implosion. And as I think back on it, it was primarily a vision, doctrinal, and strategy disconnect that we experienced. We added one staff person who, inside of 3 months, left us, and about a third to a half of the people with him. And so obviously that was a very painful experience. And from a numbers of people standpoint, we never recovered from that. You know, we were thinking large church and offering children's and youth and singles and worship and every possible kind of ministry. And we quickly found that with only a half of us left, that there was no way we could compete with congregations who were doing a better job of what we tried to do, you know, just down the street. So I re-engaged my dental hygiene background, which I graduated from in 1977 at the University of Alberta. And I was bivocational from the year 2003 right up until last August. And, you know, even in the last 15 years, as I think about it, the real elephant in the room for the entire 15 years was theological and biblical perspectives. That's kind of what held us together, and it also caused us to disperse as people moved here and there to where we are a small congregation with a large land asset. So theologically and biblically, and the reason I'm talking about it is because it really shaped our story. And I would say in a general sense that what we carry inside of us biblically, theologically, really is very influential in where any ministry would end up going. So I grew up in a fairly conservative evangelical kind of space, and all the while my heart was really for the LGBTQ community, and I just could not put it together biblically and theologically. And so for the last 10 to 15 years, I read and studied relentlessly, and I have found my voice over this time period. Not that you ever arrive by any stretch, and I'm not talking just about the LGBTQ-ish question. I'm also talking about, is God violence, you know, from the standpoint of a flood, or go into this promised land and kill all the men, women, children, and animals that are there and take possession of the land. Questions about how science and faith line up, questions about the nature of the scriptures, inspiration and authority, atonement theory, the nature of God. All of those questions were on the table in the last 10 to 15 years. And the group of us that journeyed this, you know, were just as diverse as possibly could be. So I want to just read you a quote about the matter of finding your voice, because it's an important one to me. And it's a quote by a person by the name of Akmal Mishakharal. I don't know how famous or not this person is, and I've read so many books I can't remember where I get my quotes from. But he says this: "It took some time, but I found my voice. At some point, even though it is totally uncertain, you have to take the risk of following your own intuition, your own voice." And that's where I'm at, you know. I was all over the map on the more contentious issues around faith communities, and it's taken me 10 to 15 years to kind of find where I've come out. And there have obviously been a lot of important theologians and biblical scholars and practitioners that have spoken into where I'm at now, you know. And I could, you know, give you some names like Richard Rohr, Cynthia Bourgeau, John Shelby Spong, Dominic Crossan, Marcus Borg, Bart Ehrman, Pete Enns, Rob Bell, Brian McLaren, Kent Dobson, David Gushy, Rachel Held Evans, Nadia Boltz-Weber, Ken Wilber, and others. And, you know, you're smiling because those, you know, are familiar names to us. So fast forward a bit to the end of 2018, and that's when those of us who were in the room, about 25 people at Joshua Creek Church, it's almost like we saw our communal shadow. And it was just plain to see some of the writing on the wall. And it was basically, we either die and just give this land asset of 50 acres and whatever it's worth, somewhere in the $10 million range at this point. We either die and just give away our land asset to charities, or we undergo a metamorphosis. And so, you know, the metaphor that came to mind was the caterpillar to cocoon to butterfly analogy, where we made a decision to undergo a metamorphosis, and that, of course, the middle stage there is a cocoon, and that's pretty much mush. You really don't know what this new flying entity is going to look like. And for me personally, it came to the question, given the chance to do church the way you dream it could be, where would you go from here? And I've been waiting all my life to ask that question. There's an important person in my life who 10 or 15 years ago, his name is Jim Thwaites. And the way he's a leader in the church in Australia. And I would describe him as an ecclesia futurist. He was always kind of seeing what things are going to be like in the future. Sad to say, he is suffering from dementia now, which is really quite the irony, and also breaks my heart. But I went to Niagara Falls with him about 15 years ago, and and we were sitting in a restaurant and looking out at the falls, and I said, Jim, what is the future of the church going to look like? What does the future church look like? And his first response was, I don't know. And then he took a couple of long breaths, and then he said, but I think 90% of it is going to be under the radar screen. And that line just really printed on my heart. And it was an important part of my journey going forward. So I want to talk just a little bit about this DNA, which is so important as we all, you know, carry something and give leadership to whatever entity we are a part of. The place I have come out from the standpoint of all of these contentious issues that are on the table is that I essentially am only interested in doing church in a way that holds a space that is as diverse and as inclusive as our understanding of God and the universe are. You know, for me, LGBTQ plus, interfaith, no faith, all the different sectors of society, it's all in the room and it's on the table. And I really am personally only interested in leading something that gives all the space that I understand God would occupy. And so that in itself has been a journey. You know, I've been at this for 40 years. And as I think about it, when we started off in the 80s, you know, this may not be your testimonial, but mine was, we were all building our own castles at that time, and hoping to do better maybe than the space that was next to us. My metaphor for that is that I was the leader of a ministerial in Mississauga that was a Christian ministerial, and I felt that our doctrinal differences were so diverse around the table that I disbanded the group because I didn't think that there was enough common ground. That was my 80s experience as I was on my way to building a megachurch. Well, in the 90s, the way I would describe it is that there was a wind of the Spirit, I feel, that was helping us as faith leaders to get a little more humble And I actually went to Argentina, which was a shining example of a place where different and diverse faith communities were getting together, praying together, getting to know each other, and actually taking on projects together. And so that was an important next step for faith communities to understand that if we're going to be helpful and impactful, we really need to be unified as leaders together. So that was the 90s. Then in the early 2000s, the focus, from my perspective, went from a focus on churches and parishes to what was going on in the other spheres of life, in the business world, in healthcare, in recreation, in entertainment, in politics. And so it was like, how can we move beyond the walls of a facility? And so I went to a conference in the UK, which in some regards seems to be 10 or 15 years ahead of us in some senses. And we were sitting around the table talking to people who were trying to figure out how to disband their Sunday morning services so that they could be more relevant during the rest of the week. And there was a sense, you know, I mean, this may be an overstatement, but there was almost a sense in which the church, like other organizations, was a power center where, you know, it was influencing people's thoughts and feelings and behaviors, and it was very difficult for people to understand their life and effectiveness outside of the context of their church experience. And of course, you know, organizations all have something of a power center and guide and influence thinking and feeling and behavior. And so what was happening there at the Raft was a sense of how can we humble ourselves and die to church as we've known it to be, and be more of a serving people that mesh and mix it up with the rest of society. So yeah, you know, that's kind of a bit of the history, and I'm kind of wanting to skip over some things here. In August of 2019, I resigned my 3 dental hygiene positions, and then in working with the group of 15 persons that we are, my full-time job became who and how are we going to collaborate with in order to create what we're calling Heart Comonos. And I'm grateful to Ted Reed, who in the session that he did on Commons, that terminology just has really hung with me, and so it's our working title. And I've spent the last 5 months having conversations with potential collaborative partners in the creation of this Heart Comonos. We've talked to youth ministries, and we've talked to social innovation leaders and mentors, and I have visited a number of hubs over this time period. And so this baby that we are incubating at this particular time, what we're looking at is a space in the Mississauga area for a Heart Comonos, a place where spirituality and psychological and physical and social well-being is integrated in a way that just really opens up the ministry space in the way that I tried to describe, that it's a God space that that is open and in its diversity and inclusiveness to everyone out there. So that is the big project. And the other baby that we're nourishing is just journeying with the 15 people that we are, which is a journey in and of itself. And there's a number of projects that we're doing there. And then also the third baby that we are nourishing is a Millennial and Gen Z initiative, and this one primarily in the downtown Toronto area, because a lot of the kids that grew up in the context of Mississauga Community Church are now living in the Toronto area, and so we're looking to launch something that zeroes in on that particular community. And what I would want to say there, just in closing here before we open it up, is that, whereas it seems like certain people groups were the subject of conflict and division in the church, I have a strong sense that some of those, what we might refer to as weak links, or things that we didn't know how to handle, will actually be the people groups that inform what church will look like in the future. And so as we engage with the LGBTQ community, and as we engage with the marginalized people groups that have been overwhelmed by the power center that the church has been, and really invite that representation into the cocoon, into the mush, I think we're going to see that the LGBT community will actually show us how, in a more wholesome way, sexuality is integrated with our spirituality and with other aspects of our living. And so the word integration is a really, really important word to me going forward as we try to find our way. So I did skip over a lot of stuff, so maybe some of your questions will bring some of that out, and we'll just kind of see where we land.